of integration in South Asia is not an economic problem or is not even a bureaucratic problem. In my understanding, it's a very, very strong political economic problem. So that's the kind of idea I just want to stretch and taking clue from your trust deficit, Sanjay. So therefore, when it comes to these political economy challenges, here I can see few issues. First is the size imbalance. And India occupies more than 70% of land, population of GDP of South Asia. And if you compare South Asia with European Union and ASEAN, you don't see this kind of imbalance in many of the successful region integration areas. That means, as Sanjay very nicely pointed out in one of your slides, that India has a much larger role to play as a leader. So that kind of leadership is extremely important from India, to make this regional integration agenda forward in South Asia. So, but as an outsider, as a non-Indian, how do I see India's role or leadership role? I see that it's a kind of inconsistent. Sometimes it's very, very active, very positive, and sometimes very, I would say that India is very eager to take this agenda forward. For example, India's unilateral decision to grant LDC or duty-free preference to LDCs in South Asia. I think it's a remarkable, just a showcasing of leadership role. But in some other areas, we see the kind of, I would say, lethargic or lack of interest. So I think this is something extremely important, that we see that kind of leadership from India. So, but India's leadership role is also kind of affected by the domestic politics in India. So domestic politics in other South Asian countries also very, very important. But here I think the domestic politics in India also affect the kind of whole integration, region integration process. Then the second point is the role of other South Asian countries. As I said, that the domestic politics in other South Asian countries are also extremely important. But at the same time, I think there is a fear, as Sanjay pointed out, there is a fear that there's a fear of Indian dominance. But the other South Asian countries, not many, they actually looked at the opportunities that you have the largest market in this region, which is the Indian market, and how to tap the potentials of this larger market by exporting to this largest market. And I just want to highlight, and also not only exporting, but I think I don't really want to take this mercantilist approach. Also importing from India, it can also benefit your economy. The best example is Bangladesh. Bangladesh actually has shown how the country can import raw materials from India and use these raw materials in its major export sector, the ready-made garment sector. I think this is a remarkable success story, which many of the South Asian countries actually failed. Sanjay very rightly pointed out the case between the trade of India and Pakistan, where I think that probably Pakistan missed out the train or the kind of opportunity. And the way Bangladesh showed that even importing from India can be extremely useful for your industrialization process. And so that's why, despite that, many South Asian countries, they have the fear of premature deindustrialization. When I look at the data, Bangladesh has been able so far to actually increase the value added and employment share of manufacturing. So I think that is something, and in that case, the importing from India has helped Bangladesh's industrialization process. So my next point is that unlike Southeast Asia, where we see a very deeper integration through ASEAN, I also see there that there is a kind of convergence of development strategies there. But in South Asia, we don't see that. The 8 South Asian countries probably moved into different directions when it comes to trade policy, when it comes to FDI policy, macro policies. So we need to have a kind of convergence. And here I agree with Dr. Nagesh Kumar. And I think this is something extremely important, that the SDGs have given us this opportunity. Since all these 8 South Asian countries, they have the commitment, the political commitment of implementing SDGs. And there is a high chance of aligning their development strategies through SDGs. So I think this is an extreme important opportunity, prime opportunity, which the South Asian countries should not miss. And also the COVID-19 situation, a crisis situation, is also giving an opportunity to work together. I don't want to highlight that part. Dr. Kumar and Dr. Sanjay Khatria, they already elaborated that point, but I think this is also an opportunity. Another point, I'm just towards my end of my discussion. Another point which Sanjay did not touch, and neither Dr. Kumar, I think this is very sensitive, which is the China factor. China factor, I think this is something very sensitive, I know, but this is something we can't ignore. We know that India has a kind of reservation about China because of its bilateral political relation. But the other South Asian countries, how do they see China? Most of them, they see China as a kind of major trading partner as well as a source of FDI. So I think there is a need for reconciliation of this China factor in the South Asian integration process. Otherwise, we'll be missing something. And we'll still have some gap in our understanding of each other and how do we see the world. So I'm very much at the end. So finally, what we need. In my understanding, what we need a very strong political settlement or agreement among the political elites in the South Asian countries. So when you talk about not only in my understanding, the economic elites, the business elites, they are in kind of understanding. They can understand. They largely understand the need for regional integration. But the political elites, they are divided. So if there is a kind of mechanism which can bring these political elites into kind of agreement, that would really help. So in my understanding, this kind of consultation, dialogues, volumes or researches by glass half full, as Sanjay has done, and more interactions, and also promotion of political liberalism, I think that can be extremely helpful to get us together and get this kind of political settlement right. I will stop here. Over to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salim Rehman. I think you have caught not just one bull, but maybe more than one bull by the horns. I think you have flagged a point that has been recurring, this element of political will, political commitment, and political leadership, and particularly the role of the largest country in the area. But you have also gone beyond the India-Pakistan, the obstacles to greater South Asian regional cooperation by bringing in the other bull, which is the China factor. And you've also made some other very interesting points, amongst which I'd say that this whole idea of a convergence of development strategies, the comparison with Southeast Asia, I think is a very important point. I think the information about the South Asian regional harmonization and standards organization in Dhaka, something that I didn't actually find mentioned in the report, but obviously that could play a very important role in this whole issue about information awareness and about standard setting and the kind of obstacles to trade that take place because of standards. And I won't summarize the rest, but again, I think they're very good discussion points. And in fact, to follow, particularly given all the political issues that you have raised and brought to a kind of flagged and highlighted, I think we are actually very fortunate that we have the right person to be able to address this, Ambassador Shyam Saran, senior fellow at the CPR and member of its board, former foreign secretary, former special envoy of the Prime Minister for Nuclear Affairs and National Security Board, and chairman of the Research and Information System for Developing Countries. He's currently also, as I mentioned, in the governing board of the CPR, life trustee of the Indian International Center, a trustee for the World Wildlife Fund, and a member of the national executive of FICCI, showing his sort of wide range of interests, a very prolific writer, a major public intellectual, and perhaps the best place to, I think, flag all the points that have been raised essentially by economists, by scholars, and by more technical contributors to this process. And I think we can raise this to a political and diplomatic level with Ambassador Shyam Saran. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gautam. And let me begin by complimenting Sanjay for the very fine study that he has led on South Asian trade and economic integration. And as has been pointed about by other panelists, we see that there is a huge potential. There is need for a lot of ambition. But at the end of the day, as our distinguished colleague from Bangladesh pointed out, it's all about politics. So I think it's been study after study which has tried to persuade leaders in South Asia that they are missing out on what is perhaps a very big opportunity, I would say, for the region, which is one of the fastest growing regions in the world. But somehow we have not been able to get to that. So politics is at the heart of why we have not been able to actually realize this potential. So let me begin by trying to, head-on address that issue. So it has been pointed out that we have, the problem of asymmetry in the region, the fact that the sheer size of India does create anxieties about domination amongst our smaller neighbors. There is also, by the way, on the Indian side, there has been for a long time almost a sense of siege with respect to smaller neighbors around us. A constant fear that there may be a ganging up of the smaller neighbors, which might erode India's interests. And somehow India has to protect itself. So, as I have tried to point out again and again, that we look upon our borders not as connectors, but we look upon our borders as walls behind which we must, try and protect ourselves. So this is a mindset issue. We need to be able to get over this issue. Look at, in fact, borders as connectors, as I said. Look at borders as enabling transmission belts of development across borders. The other aspect is when we are talking about connectivity and we are talking about trade facilitation, why is it that when we see that there are examples in Southeast Asia, examples in Europe, examples even in Africa, where connectivity has been embraced, why is it that there is still a inhibition in terms of bringing about that connectivity, so that we are able to exploit the one big asset which we have, which other trading partners do not have, which is proximity. It is only through connectivity that you can have proximity. Why does it not happen? Because again, when you have that kind of a mindset of being under siege or being threatened from across your borders, then of course the security overlay becomes something which overrides all the various arguments for closer connectivity, for greater flow of goods, of peoples, of even ideas across borders. So how do we address that security overlay? That has become a major challenge. That it is not by saying the security consideration is irrelevant or is exaggerated, but I think what are the ways in which we can address those security considerations? And Nagesh pointed out how the use of containers, the use of electronic tracking methods. These are ways in which we can convince the security establishment in our countries that actually that security consideration can actually be addressed by using modern technology. We are still very far away from that, and then to be honest, there is a resistance to that. For example, when I was in Nepal, I tried very, very hard to have these electronic fixed scanners installed at the borders, so that you could have a much flow of these container trucks and goods cargo trucks across the border, because with the scanners and with very sophisticated software, you could do just a few trial inspections, but let most of the traffic move across the borders. But there was a tremendous amount of resistance to that from those who were manning the borders. There are reasons why that is the case, but unless there is a very strong political push, it is difficult to overcome that kind of resistance. So this is something that we need to look at. Now, even if we are looking at the security aspect, Gautam, you have been ambassador to Myanmar, as I have been. And, when I was in Myanmar, we were involved in the construction of the famous, Tamu-Kale highway. So there used to be quite a lot of, materials which had to be transported from across India into Myanmar. So in connection with that, I used to go and sometimes spend time, sometimes incommunicado at the border. And I became aware of the fact that even though we had a border agreement which limited trade to something like 60 items on both sides, this was a border across which massive amount of contraband was moving every day. You are saying contraband, but it is not really in that sense contraband because there is a huge demand for those goods. Chinese synthetic blankets, you had plastic molded furniture, you had, footwear, furniture, of different kinds, having actually a negative impact on the northeast of India. But, I could not get across to our government the argument that how does it make a difference if a Chinese product is coming through the border from Myanmar, why don't you treat it in the same manner with MFN as you do at the port in Calcutta? The government of India is missing out on a huge amount of, revenue. There is a kind of a criminalization of trade which is taking place at the border, and the whole argument about, security then completely goes out of the window. So all the things which you are doing because you are concerned about security, actually you end up by undermining security much more than would have otherwise been the case if you actually allowed the border trading point to be one for regular trade even. So there are the issues of this kind, and I'm speaking mainly from the point of view of India, because I think unless India takes the lead, it is very difficult to change the kind of situation which we are talking about. So this security overlay must be met head on, because it is actually, instead of enhancing our security, it is actually eroding our security. I would be very interested in your view, because you have also seen that same kind of issue, perhaps during your time in Myanmar. The other aspect that I want to point to is that we are talking about, is there a political commitment? Is there a political buy-in? Please look at multiple Sark declarations at the summit level, where if you were only to go by the language of those declarations, you would think that the South Asia is the most economically integrated region in the world. Now, many people do not know that actually 2010 to 2020, which is now coming to an end, is actually the Sark decade for multimodal transport connectivity. So, and the leaders have signed on to this. It is not at a bureaucratic level. How much progress have been able to make in terms of transport connectivity during the last decade? Some progress, yes, but certainly the kind of ambition that the leaders have been trying to demonstrate, it is certainly not happening on the ground. And it is not that, oh, the leaders are ready, but the bureaucrats are not. That is simply not the case. The leaders find it very easy to sign on to these declarations with no intention of actually addressing the kind of political considerations, the security considerations that others have talked about as well. So we have to confront that. And here I would like to end with something that we have tried to do. I am part of what is known as Champions process for South. I think Sanjay has been also very much involved with that. So I'm sure that he will corroborate what I'm saying. So what we started doing was getting a group of people from the South Asian countries, people like me, but others also from, let's say, from Bangladesh. We have had Professor Gohar Rizvi, former High Commissioner to India, Ambassador Tariq Karim. We have had a couple of former foreign secretaries from Pakistan. We have had a former secretary for power from Nepal. So we have had a group of people who have actually been in the public space, in the policy making space. So they are aware of why things which are accepted at the political level, why do they not get implemented at the ground level? So the idea was to have very, very open and frank conversations about what are the psychological barriers, what are the political barriers, which is preventing South Asian countries from moving ahead with what is quite patently in the interest of all our countries, in the interest of the people of South Asia. And what we came up with was, okay, these are the barriers. We can't, sort of head on try to remove these barriers. So what we started doing was what we called a process of nibbling away. You sort of keep eroding this kind of barrier slowly, but always keeping the big picture in mind. The second aspect was, once you have that big picture, break it down into smaller components, because it is our view that governments in South Asia, but even large organizations everywhere, find it very difficult to swallow big projects in one go, no matter how compelling they are, because there is a nervousness about what the political implications may be, a fear that if it does not work, then we will be held responsible for some failure. So it is, even though there is a political commitment, it is difficult to find actually practical progress on the ground. So what we started doing was, we want to do the restoration of river transportation between India and Bangladesh, or some kind of a power trading arrangement between India and Bangladesh, but perhaps Bhutan or Nepal into this process. Is there something that we can do? So what we did was, we broke these bigger, projects to small components. So once you have even a modest advance, that sets up these kind of a stage for further advance. And this is precisely what has happened. That we have today, making a modest start from this process of Champions process, we identified river transportation as something that we could take forward. We began very modestly, okay, 1 or 2 river ports, but provide, the kind of infrastructure which is required, the kind of, procedures required for movement. 1 work, 2 work, and then, it opened up for a considerable amount of, passage, in fact, to our northeastern states through Bangladesh. And Bangladesh, earns transit fees from that. Much bigger, much more dramatic development as far as the power trade between India and Bangladesh is concerned. We started off with 5 megawatts, a target of something like 5,000 megawatts, 6,000 megawatts. So, and we have been able to bring in, because when Bhutan sees, oh, there is a big potential here, Nepal sees there is a big potential here, they also want to be a part of this exercise. So this was another way of trying to overcome some of those barriers. So I would suggest that, the very compelling case for regional trade and investment and collaboration, which has been made in this study, and also in the ESCAP study that Nagesh do. From Bangladesh also mentioned that there are several studies in this respect. Perhaps there is a way in which, taking these political realities and psychological realities into account, we start, years slowly through more modest, measures to begin with, and slowly start expanding them. I think this is a practical way of taking this forward. But don't be fooled by the fact that there is a rhetorical commitment, which is very, very ambitious. As I said, I did a study of the successive Sark summit declarations. And let me tell you that if you really go through that, you would believe that South Asian leaders are really some of the most visionary when it comes to regional cooperation. But it is that is not the case on the ground. So politics is the problem. And I think without addressing this politics, we will not be able to get very far. And on the China question, I would say that precisely because China is making greater inroads into our neighborhood, all India should really, try to fast track its own integration with its as something which should really stay on the part of India to really South Asian neighborhood. India should become the transit country of choice for all its neighbors. India should be able to open up its economy, its market to whatever our neighbors are able to sell to us. It is a small fraction of the Indian market. Even if you actually were to buy everything which your neighbors wanted to sell to you, it would be a drop in the ocean as far as the India is concerned. Here is an advantage for you. Use that asset. That is the way in which you can meet the China challenge. You have the advantage of proximity, again, vis-a-vis China. Use that proximity in order to be able to, be the engine of growth for the entire region. If we can do that, then I think even in terms of the politics that we are talking about, we should be able to address that. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Once again, I think you've reinforced the point that has been made that politics is at the heart of everything. Sorry? Yeah, am I audible? Yeah, okay. So thank you, sir, for reinforcing the point that has been made, which is that politics is at the heart of everything that we do. And also, if I can join that with Professor Selim's observation that domestic politics also has a say. And I think you ended by giving a very, very good justification for regional cooperation based on politics. Precisely the proximity that we have with our region and whatever it is, the strategic competition that we have with China. That strategic competition with China is, in fact, could be a major driver for regional integration, particularly in our own region, South Asia region. And I hope that message gets across. I think also, thank you for pulling out that other skeleton in the cupboard that we had not raised so far, which is how the security issue in many ways dampens or inhibits our regional cooperation. Also this issue that even when we've had the political will, as manifested in our Sark declarations, that there have been implementation issues down the line. And perhaps that one way of approaching it is through, breaking down the big picture into smaller, more achievable components. And we have seen actually a combination of all this. I think leadership is very, very important. And we have seen a combination of this in actually working its way in our relations with Bangladesh. I think gradually a lot of the inhibitions to transit are bit by bit breaking down. You also mentioned Myanmar. I think that's another story. I won't go into it because in the interest of discussion. We have a question from the audience, and that question relates to regional value chains, the growth of regional value chains. I think the question from Julie Bowman is whether there are good examples of the growth of regional value chains in South Asia, and in what products or in what sectors that is. But let me also add a kind of more general question to that. And I think, anybody who wants to speak on either of these questions could. Clearly, in Dr. Kathuria's analysis, what we have seen is there are 3 levels of barriers. He mentioned 4 barriers, but in a way, they can be categorized into trade inefficiencies, where simply there are implementation inefficiencies, information inefficiencies, various kinds of inefficiencies, simply because the system is not good, or if the regime that we have is not being implemented well. The second is the issue of measures, policy measures, which in one way or the other go around to a question of protectionism, where interests or lobbies in one particular area may actually inhibit trade liberalization and therefore hold the whole region hostage to more restrictive trade practices. And of course, the third one is at the political level. Ambassador Shyam Saran also raised this whole point that, perhaps there is a need for an eminent persons group in all countries who can, flag the middle distance between the technical inputs that we have and the political leadership that we have at that level, to be able to mobilize and galvanize a kind of political support behind the idea of greater regionalism, open regionalism, as Dr. Katuria has flagged. So on these points, on the point of on the point of perhaps the need for a body of public intellectuals who can play a much more positive advocacy role to be able to promote greater open regionalism. Secondly, this whole issue of vested interests. How important is that in being able to prevent our greater regional integration? And thirdly, how can we address these trade inefficiencies, which are very much to do with the implementation of already agreed issues at the ground level? Maybe, Dr. Katsuria, I could begin with you as the lead author of this flagship report, and you could take both Julie's question as well as the points that I've raised. And of course, we would welcome any further questions from our audience.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And thank you to all the panelists, Nagesh, Salim, and Ambassador Saran, for their very thoughtful comments. Julie's question. Sorry?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so on Julie's question of the regional value chains, and I think the potential, what is a bit frustrating is that the potential is so much more than what is happening. As Salim mentioned, there is a value chain happened in garments, where Bangladesh uses inputs from India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, and managerial inputs also from these countries, apart from textiles and yarn and fabric. And so there is a thriving apparel industry in South Asia, but Bangladesh is really the heart of that. So that's one value chain. Again, even there, a lot more could happen. But there are so many other sectors where value chains could come up if there was, the sine qua non for value chains is that you need to have very fast in and out transport, which simply it doesn't exist in South Asia. Goods need to come in duty free, speed to their destination factory, and then speed out again. And so you need connectivity and zero tariffs for that. So there are regimes, but these are very cumbersome, as you also said, Gautam. And there are some other sectors where this could be possible. Is, for example, this could be in medical equipment, where we could have in rubber products. There is a large, between Sri Lanka and India. There could be a tourism. Why just in goods? There could be a tourism value chain. There could be a medical tourism value chain, which in another report of ours, Priya Mathur has a chapter on the Northeast where she talks about medical tourism and promoting a value chain there. So there are many possibilities, but I think we need to solve the basic trade issues there on connectivity and tariffs for this to really get off the ground. So I think Ambassador Mukhopadhyay's issues on, I agree very much with what Ambassador Saran had said about the advocacy within countries. So to complement the work of the broader champion, the cross-border champions network. In fact, this was, in a sense, part of the intention of that champions network, which I was a part of from its inception for many, many years. But the sort of the within country part didn't have enough momentum, didn't take off. But I think that in order to, it didn't take off in a systematic way. Obviously, champions there within countries, like there is like Salim himself within Bangladesh. But this hasn't really taken off in a way that we would have liked, in a systemic way. And surely there are vested interests on protection, right? So here I want to look at my experience, cite my example both in Sri Lanka and Pakistan, right? So 3 times in the Nawaz Sharif administration, 3 times we were very close to signing off on the MFN, the most favored nation clause, or treating India the same way as Pakistan treats other trading partners. 3 times this was close to signing, and each time something came in the way. But the most fundamental part of it was, one was a political miscalculation, but the most important one was really, as you said, is the fear of different lobbies that they would get swamped by Indian automobiles, pharmaceuticals, agriculture. At different points of time, these came to the fore. And I think when I was working in Sri Lanka, and I think they have also been thinking of expanding the agreement with India from a free trade agreement to a deeper agreement, economic and technology cooperation agreement, or Sri Lanka signed an FTA with Singapore, which became more controversial after it was signed. But the point is that free trade agreements can handle political economy. That's by design. They can backload liberalization in sensitive sectors. And that was, for example, that's exactly what the India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement did. Actually, it has backloaded very significantly the Sri Lanka's liberalization and that's what happened also in the Pakistan-China Free Trade Agreement. So the less powerful economic neighbors or free trade partners can be accommodated. And I think it is, at the end of the day, it does require a sign-off.
I'm afraid I think it's frozen, the screen, the sound.
Is everybody else hearing me?
No, it's okay here.
Okay.
Ambassador, it might be on your end. The problem might be on your end.
No, both the sound and the video is frozen.
So it's audible and visible to the rest of us. So it looks as though.
Okay, you just go ahead.
You're back, sir.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that, so I think there is a way. Obviously, there are political concerns, and especially in today's day and age, when we've had all the backlash against liberalization, we have to be very sensitive to that. But there is a way. The world is now very experienced with handling free trade agreements, and there is a way to take into account the concerns in a very and India has done that in some sense by opening up its market to LDCs, as Salim said. Completely open market to all the LDCs in South Asia, well ahead of that reciprocal liberalization at some time in the future, as SAFTA, undefined by SAFTA, in fact, when that would happen. So it is possible to do it. And I think the systemic inefficiencies, which Ambassador Mukhopadhyay mentioned, I think those are all too apparent. Most of them are not by design, I think, but maybe sometimes, especially at customs and all, partly some of those may be by design, but most of it, actually, these sort of non-tariff barriers, if you like, in implementation or broader implementation inefficiencies in all the agreements that have been reached are simply, lack of the capacity and the desire to push through something. And in that context, what Ambassador Saran mentioned, the breaking down of the big projects, some of it, which we have tried to do also in the report, really going an incremental way. But I think we can take this on board and try to break down all recommendations that way, and keep the big picture in mind, but then really parse these. I think those will be very, very important. So I think, and I agree with all the other comments that my fellow panelists have made. So I don't really in the interest of time and giving others a chance, I will stop.
Thank you. Would any of the other panelists like to also comment on any of the questions?
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, Dr. Salim.
Yes. I just wanted to highlight on that regional value chain. I think it's extremely important, and Sanjay has elaborated on that. And the example is, of course, a success example case is the ready-made garments. But there are many products, well, actually, there have been many studies as well on the potential of regional value chain. I know Dr. Kumar and from UNESCO, from UNCTAD, they have done quite a lot of studies. How do we take this into account, and how we can actually translate the recommendations in those studies and then take those things agenda forward? I see a real game changer can be use of the special economic zones. Countries like Bangladesh has really come up with the idea of special economic zone very, very strongly. And this is a very strong policy agenda now in Bangladesh. And there are 2 dedicated special economic zone for India, actually for Indian investment. So I can see that kind of economic zone, and I know that Nepal is also interested, Sri Lanka, they have also economic zones. So this can be a kind of game changer if there is a more proactive role from Indian investors. I know a lot of Indian investors, they actually invest outside of this region, not in this region. But we need to have a better understanding why they are not willing to invest in this region. So, what are the problems? We know the problems on the trade side, but on the investment side also, there are many rules and regulations, regulatory barriers in those host countries. So if a very broad discussion and a very meaningful discussion can really take place, and Dr. Kumar, I know he can take a very strong initiative, being the kind of head of South and Southwest region UNESCO in Delhi. I think that can be very, very useful. How to really streamline the rules and regulations, how we can make the special economic zone effective, and how we can actually have more intelligent investment around this regional value chain. I think that will be extremely useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Nagesh, yes, you'd like to say a few words? Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Ambassador. I think every point that has been made is very, very interesting and very useful. I agree that garment sector has been one of the sectors where regional value chains have really come up. And Salim's point about special economic zones playing a role in that and facilitating this regional value chain formation is very important, because domestic tariff areas in every single South Asian country continue to remain very, very protected. And I think in garments, a very interesting example of Brandix, a major garment manufacturer of Sri Lanka, coming and establishing a major factory in the special economic zone in India, in Visakhapatnam, is a shining example of value chains being facilitated by special economic zones. I think this is the kind of examples we need to replicate and talk about. The other thing is, I think the point about policy advocacy is very well made, and Ambassador, you also highlighted that importance of policy advocacy. But one point which I thought is very important in this policy advocacy, because one often hears that trade liberalization, regional trade liberalization, or SAFTA is a project to design the, project to enhance the dominance of India in the region, which is already there. And so every country has a deficit with India, and this will lead to more of a deficit. So this is the refrain, common refrain you hear from the policymakers in all the South Asian countries. But the very empirical basis of all different FTAs, and I refer to in my remarks of the India-Sri Lanka FTA, is, and Salim's work through CG models has always come up with one single finding, that trade liberalization in FTAs benefits smaller countries more than the larger countries. And that is the evidence we need to highlight, that this will help
the smaller countries which do not have supply capacities to export to the larger markets, the FTA or SAFTA will facilitate creation of supply capacities in the smaller countries, lesser developed economies, for exporting back to the larger economies. And the evidence is uniform all across these regional groupings. In Europe, where after the integration, Portugal, Greece, Spain, became major hubs for German manufacturing. So Volkswagen cars, are assembled more in Spain than in Germany. So ASEAN is a very similar example. So lesser developed economies rise and catch up with the more developed economies. I think this is a point which needs to be also, emphasized in the policy advocacy when we try to support and put the evidence on the table. This is the kind of evidence we need to put on the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nagesh. In fact, I think we are actually running out of time. I would have liked to have probed a couple of points, one of which is also flagged in the chat box. One is, the scope for agricultural trade and agricultural investment liberalization, given that a good part of the people of the region, derive their livelihood from land and water, from agriculture, fisheries, animal husbandry. And, what would be the kind of constraints or restraints in being able to open that? A second point that I would have liked to pursue is Dr. Selim Rehan's point about whether it's possible to bring about a kind of policy dialogue, perhaps by institutions such as ours and RIS and various others, which is on this whole issue of a development convergence, because I think there is a problem there. That we do not have a clear and coherent idea of what kind of development model we want to follow, and that is much less in many of the other parts of the world. So I think these were 2 points that I would have liked to follow. But from the audience there is, and I think we just have about 2-3 minutes to get over this. One is a kind of observation really about precisely this point that I made about connectivity and agriculture and freer trade. But another point, which if I can interpret rightly, it's about the domestic narrative of the present leadership in India being domineering, and perhaps what kind of impact it has on regional trade. I suppose the question is whether a kind of muscular policies of India today, or at least the muscular rhetoric, might be scaring away some of our neighbors. If I understood Mr. Birendra Kumar Sinha's question right, and Mr. Sumesh Mathur's sort of general observation, I will just leave it for a quick round, perhaps at this time beginning with Ambassador Saran, in case he would like to address either of these two issues. Is Ambassador Saran there, or have we lost him? Because I don't see him.
I'm here.
Yeah. Great.
I'm here.
Right.
Okay. No, I would agree that whatever is the political rhetoric domestically does have an impact on regional cooperation and bilateral cooperation. Some of the statements coming out from, for example, from the Home Minister about illegal immigration from Bangladesh into India, or certainly the very heightened polemic with respect to Pakistan, or perhaps even some errors of omission with respect to our relations with Nepal. All these do impact on regional cooperation. But on the other side, I would say that this government has also been very, very enthusiastic about what has been the neighborhood first policy. So if neighborhood first policy is something that enjoys consensus from even different political dispensations in the past, that's a very good thing, that there is a recognition that India can really not expect to play a credible regional role, a credible global role, unless it gets its neighborhood right. So that is a good basis on which some of the things that we are talking about, we can actually try to push. So, okay, if you really believe in neighborhood first policy, then these are the sort of things that we need to do. I'm afraid that unfortunately in the trade field, the overall trend seems to be towards more economic autarky rather than looking at, how do we really use trade as a lever for really bringing about much higher rates of growth. But here I would agree that some kind of policy dialogue would be very useful, and in that sense, whatever we are trying to do, say with the Center for Policy Research, and I hope we can, revive a network of, think tanks which can really look at that kind of policy dialogue amongst the South Asian countries. But I would also say that maybe the point made by Professor Salim that the SDGs actually provide a very good platform to start talking on these matters, because I have also the fear that if we start talking about policy dialogue and how we should try to bring about some convergence in our economic strategies, somebody will get up on his hind legs and see, this is yet another effort on the part of India to try and dominate even our economic strategies. So perhaps not to go in that direction, but to really look at what are the kind of platforms which can provide the basis for that kind of dialogue. But the other one is, for example, which suggests itself is ecology, climate change, because all of us are going to be very, very much impacted by that. So there are ways in which we can actually have the kind of a dialogue which can, without appearing to do so, does bring about that kind of at least a minimal level of convergence, so that we can take this project ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we are, I'm afraid we are really running out of time now. So before I end, I think I have to give our lead author and our principal, so to say, speaker today, the last words on anything that he would like to conclude with or add to the discussion. Dr. Kathuria.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you to everybody for great discussion. Well, just 2 or 3 points I want to make. So one is a point of information, and then I add on to that. As I mentioned earlier, that we are in the process. In the next few months, there will be a new flagship report from the World Bank on investment, regional investment pioneers in South Asia, I'm a co-author of that along with Ravi Yatawara. So we will be presenting this soon. And so hopefully we can have a discussion around some of the issues raised there, because I think really the private sector is at the heart of regional integration at the end of the day. That they are the ones who are implementers and executors. So even in these forums, we need to bring them front and center of that whole process. Now, my one plea has been, for the last few years, more and more forcefully I've been making that, is that, yes, we have all this issue of the politics, yes. But, we have examples of actually, the reversing so here saying that politics is obviously constraining trade or more broadly economic integration or economic exchange. But there are very good examples of that actually trade and economic exchange not being constrained by politics. And the best example that I can think of, there are many others, but Taiwan and China, right? Indeed, India, China itself, there is maybe a change in the rhetoric in the last few months, even much more now. But basically, China was among India's top 2 trade partners, despite obviously huge amount of suspicion and mistrust there. So I think that, and I'm pleading, and South Asia comes from a much better place in many bilateral relations there. So can we not have trade? And again, bearing in mind Ambassador Saran's stricture that, okay, let's not threaten anybody. So let's parse it down. Yes, we want trade to lead. Can we sort of say, okay, let's start with the really small wins, right? And I have said that to when I met the Commerce Minister of Pakistan during this book's dissemination, said, why don't you just have a discussion amongst the the standards bodies of the two countries, non-threatening. Nobody can object to it, right? So let's see what is holding up your exports from both sides. Have a technical, very, very technical discussion, right? And he very much liked that idea. So I think these kinds of issues, letting trade, not allowing trade to get bogged down, but continuing to push. And the final point I want to make is reiterate what I think everybody has said. All three of my fellow panelists have said that is, the market in India is massive. So how can we, and that was also the subject of my recent Indian Express piece about how can India import more from the region. But there's a massive market. Can we use that as a hook, for greater economy? You got a massive market. In good times, India was importing $400 billion worth of goods. Can India, can Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, all of South Asian countries, can they really be used as a tantalizing hook? And Finance Minister Mohit, when we released the book in Bangladesh, he actually said so much, and says we are exporting to Europe and America, but we forget the huge market right on our doorstep that we have really not exploited. So I think that's the hook, and I think use that, small steps and all. Thank you so much to everybody, and back to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Sanjay. And I think we can end on that note. We talked about politics trumping economics, but you've ended with economics trumping politics. And I hope that message goes out as a political message, as well as a larger business message. I think the role of business in being able to do that is also, coming into focus. So, we've actually quite substantially exceeded our time. We were expected to finish at about 7:45. I presume that this means that this has been a very successful and lively discussion. I'd like to thank, first of all, Dr. Kathuria for presenting us the conclusions of his study and the book on the glass half full on South Asian regional trade. And I would very much like to thank our very, very distinguished panelists, starting with Ambassador Shyam Saran, Dr. Nagesh Kumar, and Dr. Salim Rehan, for being present and for gracing this webinar, as also sharing their considerable insights and wisdom in all these areas. I hope this is not the end, and I hope this is the starting point of a further dialogue. And I'm sure we'll be open to suggestions for how to take this further. And of course, having Dr. Kathuria in the CPR should be a very big catalyst in being able to do that. Thank you very much. And for anything else, we'll have to conduct the discussion offline. Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Gautam.
Thank you, sir. Good day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
The best.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.